This is what confidence looks like. Row after row, boot after boot, hitting the same stone in the same instant. By 1941, this army has not lost. Not once. Not to France. Not to Poland. Not to anyone standing in front of it. A nation this size does not build an army this large by accident. It builds it because it has already decided how the next war ends. The man standing above that crowd has just watched half of Europe fall in a matter of weeks. He has no reason to believe the next country will be any different. Every officer in this frame carries the same private certainty. They are not marching into a fair fight. They are marching into a formality. This is the machine that has crushed 6 countries in 18 months. Trained, equipped, undefeated, and in a matter of days, it will be sent south, into a country most of these men could not find on a map. A country 1/40th its size. A country already exhausted from a war with someone else entirely. Germany does not expect a fight. Germany expects a formality. It does not get one. A Greek general sits across a wooden table from a German officer by torchlight, a pen in his hand, about to sign away his army's defeat. And the one thing he refuses to write is the name of the country his men actually beat first. For 7 months, one rule had defined the war in the mountains between Greece and Albania. Italy could not beat Greece. Mussolini had launched his invasion in October 1940, expecting a swift, humiliating Greek collapse that would hand him a cheap propaganda victory to match Hitler's conquests elsewhere in Europe. Instead, Greek forces had pushed the Italian army backward, out of Greek territory entirely and deep into Albania, in one of the only clear-cut Allied battlefield victories anywhere in Europe during that stretch of the war. Every Greek soldier fighting in those mountains knew exactly what that victory meant and exactly who had earned it. Then Germany invaded, and everything Greece had won against Italy became irrelevant to the outcome of the wider war. But not, as it turned out, irrelevant to how Greece chose to lose it, or to what the soldiers who beat them would later say about the men they'd fought. This is the story of the SS troops who fought their way through Greek defenses in April 1941, what they said about the men on the other side of that fight, and the Greek general who in the final hours before his army's surrender made a decision that had nothing to do with the war he was actually losing and everything to do with the one he'd already won. The war Italy started in October 1940 had begun with a demand Mussolini fully expected Greece to accept without a fight. On October 28, 1940, the Italian ambassador delivered an ultimatum to Greek Prime Minister Ioannis Metaxas before dawn, demanding the right to occupy unspecified strategic points inside Greek territory. Metaxas refused in a single word that Greeks have commemorated as a national holiday ever since. A flat rejection that gave Mussolini his invasion, but also gave Greece the moral clarity of a war it had not started and had every reason to resist without hesitation. Within hours, Italian forces crossed the border from Albania, confident the campaign would be over within weeks. It was not. Mussolini's military leadership paid the price for that miscalculation almost immediately. General Sebastiano Visconti Prasca, who had assured Rome the invasion would succeed quickly, was replaced within weeks by Marshal Pietro Badoglio's own subordinate, General Ubaldo Soddu, as the campaign stalled. Soddu himself would be replaced again by early 1941, as Mussolini cycled through commanders searching for one who could deliver the victory the original invasion plan had promised and consistently failed to produce. By February 1941, General Ugo Cavallero had taken overall command of Italian forces in Albania, inheriting a campaign that had already cost Italy dearly in both territory and prestige, and that would continue to stall through the spring despite repeated offensives. Within the first 2 weeks of the Italian invasion, that supposed mismatch produced the opposite of what Rome expected. At the Battle of Pindus, an Italian Alpine division, specifically trained and equipped for mountain warfare, advanced into the Pindus range, expecting to outflank Greek defenses through terrain most conventional forces would avoid. Instead, a heavily outnumbered Greek force, reservists, local militia, and regular army units fighting on ground they knew intimately, halted the Italian advance and then encircled and effectively destroyed the division's offensive capability within days, forcing a retreat back across the border it had just crossed. Along the coastal flank of Epirus, the Battle of Alia Calamus told the same story with different terrain. Beginning on November 2nd, Italian forces launched air and artillery strikes against Greek positions along the Calamus River, establishing a bridgehead across the river by November 5th. But the Greek defensive line held through repeated Italian infantry and light and medium tank assaults, aided as much by the harsh, hilly, rain-soaked terrain and Greek minefields as by the sheer tenacity of the defenders. The Italian offensive stalled completely within days. By mid-November, Greece had gone from defending its own territory to launching a full counteroffensive into Albania itself, pushing the Italian army backward across the same ground it had just invaded. That counteroffensive culminated in January 1941, with the capture of the strategically vital Klisura Pass in southern Albania, after 4 days of brutal fighting against a defending force that included Italy's 131st Armored Division Centauro and the elite 3rd Alpine Division Julia. Greek infantry divisions finally broke through and captured the pass on January 10th, at a cost to Italy of roughly 300 killed and 350 captured, including 25 officers. By the spring of 1941, Italian casualties in the Greek campaign numbered in the tens of thousands, and the initial invasion force had been reinforced repeatedly without breaking the stalemate. Britain's involvement added a further layer of urgency to Hitler's calculations. In early March 1941, British and Commonwealth troops, part of a deployment that came to be known as Luster Force, began landing in Greece to reinforce the Greek war effort, redirected from campaigns already underway in North Africa. For Hitler, this transformed Greece from a peripheral Italian embarrassment into a direct strategic problem. A British military presence on the Greek mainland threatened the southern flank of any future German operation against the Soviet Union, and risked giving the Royal Air Force forward airfields within striking distance of the Romanian oil fields that supplied a significant share of Germany's fuel. Securing Greece became a precondition for Operation Barbarossa itself. Operation Marita, the German invasion of Greece, began on April 6, 1941, and unlike the Italian campaign, it succeeded with brutal speed. German forces, spearheaded by armored and motorized units with overwhelming air support, tore through Greek defensive lines in the north within days. Among the spearhead units driving into Greece was the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, Hitler's own SS bodyguard formation, expanded by 1941 into a full motorized brigade and thrown into combat as one of the most capable mechanized units in the German order of battle, commanded overall by Obergruppenführer Josef Sepp Dietrich. On April 13th and 14th, the Leibstandarter's reconnaissance battalion, commanded by SS Sturmbannführer Kurt Meyer, attacked entrenched Greek positions at the Klisura Pass in Greece itself, a separate, heavily defended mountain crossing near the town of Lechovo, held by the Greek 20th Division under Colonel Miltiadis Papakonstantinou and Lieutenant Colonel Vassilios Mansouranis. The Greek defenders fought with a tenacity that stalled the German advance for the better part of a day. Demolitions along the road between Lechovo and Klisura slowed the German approach, and when German forward elements attacked the Greek line on the height of Sargonitsa at 5 in the evening on April 13th, they were thrown back in disarray by intense Greek resistance. Only one Greek company on the exposed left flank surrendered, while the rest of the line held through the night, forcing German command to commit an entire reserve battalion to renew the assault before the position finally broke. The Greek 20th Division, holding the pass against the SS assault, was already a formation stretched by months of continuous combat, first against Italy and now, with almost no time to reposition or reinforce, against a German mechanized force with capabilities the Greek army simply did not possess. That the division held for the better part of a day, inflicting the casualties it did, reflected an army fighting at the absolute limit of what it had left to give. Meyer personally reorganized his battalion into 3 separate assault groups the following morning to break the position, throwing a grenade into a stalled group of his own men to force the attack forward under fire when the advance faltered. A battlefield decision that captured the pass by mid-afternoon, but only at real cost. 1 officer and 6 men killed, another officer and 17 wounded. The battle for the heights alone yielded 600 Greek prisoners. 2 days later, Meyer's battalion pushed on to Lake Castoria, assaulting the town from the south alongside the rest of the Leibstandarter Brigade under Dietrich's overall command, facing a mixed Greek defense under Major General Sotirios Moutousis and Colonel Evstathios Leosis that included a cavalry division, elements of the 13th Infantry Division, a machine gun battalion, and 7 batteries of light and heavy artillery. The town and the surrounding heights fell by evening, and roughly 1,100 additional Greek prisoners were taken on top of the 600 from Klisura, but with over 160 Greek soldiers killed defending a position that ultimately could not hold against armor, and air support Greece simply did not have. For his actions across Klisura and Castoria, Meyer was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross on May 18, 1941. 4 days after Klisura, on April 18th, the same Leibstandarter Brigade clashed again, with Greek forces rushed to the Metsovon Pass by General Alexandros Papagos, the Greek commander-in-chief. Papagos, commanding the entirety of Greece's military effort, faced an almost impossible strategic problem once German forces crossed the border. His best divisions and most experienced commanders were committed hundreds of kilometers away in Albania, locked in an offensive against Italy that Greek public opinion would not easily permit abandoning, even as a far more dangerous threat materialized from the north. The Greek units defending Metsovon lacked the armor and motorized support to match the SS brigade directly and were eventually encircled and overwhelmed. By April 19th, German forces had captured Ioannina, cutting the final supply route of the Greek First Army. By April 20th, 1941, the military situation had become hopeless. German forces had broken through in the north. Athens itself was under direct threat, and the broader Greek defensive effort was collapsing on multiple fronts simultaneously. Surrender was not a question of if, but of how and to whom. You are a Greek officer who has spent 7 months watching your men die and bleed and freeze in mountain passes to hold a line against Italy, and defeat is coming to end that fight, not through Italian victory, but through a completely different army breaking through hundreds of kilometers away, an army that has, in its own private communications and its own commander's own words, come away from fighting you with something closer to respect than contempt. What German forces said about their Greek opponents during and after the campaign is a matter of documented record. Adolf Hitler himself, addressing the Reichstag after the campaign concluded, singled out the Greek soldier specifically among every enemy German forces had faced up to that point in the war, stating that historical justice required him to acknowledge that of all the enemies who had taken up positions against Germany, the Greek soldier in particular had fought with the greatest courage. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, Chief of Staff of the German Armed Forces, would later testify, bitterly and specifically, at the Nuremberg trials, that Greek resistance had delayed the German attack on the Soviet Union by 2 or more critical months. A delay he directly connected to Germany's eventual failure to defeat the Soviet Union before winter set in. On the ground, the respect was expressed in gestures as much as words. When Greek forts in the north surrendered on April 10th, German officers requested that Greek commanders formally inspect the German troops as a mark of honor, and the German flag was raised over the surrendered positions only after the Greek army's complete and orderly withdrawal. A German Luftwaffe officer, addressing Greek Lieutenant General Georgios directly, told him that his Eastern Macedonia Division group was the first Allied force encountered in the entire war that had not shown fear of the Stuka dive bomber. This is the environment in which Tsolakoglou makes his decision on April 20th, 1941. Adolf Hitler's birthday, as it happened, though no one on the Greek side arranged that. Rather than surrendering through official channels that would inevitably route the capitulation through a joint German-Italian process, Tsolakoglou opens direct, unauthorized contact with the nearest German commander, Sepp Dietrich himself, commanding the very Leibstandarte SS brigade that had fought through Klisura and Metsovon days earlier. Tsolakoglou's own chief of staff had traveled to Athens seeking formal authorization from the Greek High Command. The message that came back was ambiguous, more implied permission than an actual order, but Tsolakoglou decides not to wait for clarity that may never come. He offers Dietrich a full Greek surrender, 14 divisions, an entire army group, on one condition that has nothing to do with troop numbers or occupation terms. It will be a surrender to Germany, and to Germany alone, not to Italy, not to the army that had spent 7 months failing to accomplish through force of arms what Tsolakoglou is now prepared to hand Germany through negotiation. Dietrich agrees. The two men meet at Dietrich's headquarters in Vontonossi, and the protocol is negotiated on the spot with remarkably generous terms for the defeated side. Greek soldiers will not be classified as prisoners of war. Greek officers will be permitted to retain their sidearms, an unusual concession, normally reserved for surrenders between forces that have earned each other's respect on the battlefield rather than for a one-sided rout. The agreement is first drawn up and typed in Cyrillic by the Greek delegation. Then, needing a German-language copy as well, the party travels back to the pass to have it typed a second time on a battalion typewriter. It is finally signed by torchlight at 1800 hours on April 20th. The scene at Vontonossi that night deserves to be understood in its full, strange detail. Two enemy commanders, representing armies that had been trying to kill each other's soldiers for exactly 2 weeks, sat together negotiating terms by torchlight because no electrical supply reached the position. Translators worked between Greek and German in real time, with neither side fully certain the other's superiors would honor what was being agreed to in the room. Tsolakoglou, by every account of those present, negotiated not as a broken man begging for mercy, but as a commander who understood precisely what leverage remained to him even in total defeat. The simple ability to choose, in the absence of clear orders forbidding it, exactly who received his army's surrender. Dietrich, for his part, appears to have recognized real value in accepting those terms quickly, aware that a swift, generous capitulation reflected well on his own command and denied any rival German formation the chance to claim the surrender first. Neither man could have known, in that moment, how quickly the agreement would unravel under pressure from Rome. What both men did understand, sitting across that table, was that the 7 months of fighting in the mountains had earned Greece something no formal surrender document could fully capture: an enemy commander's genuine willingness to grant terms he did not have to grant, to an army that had already proven exactly what it was capable of when it had reason to fight. Word reaches General Ioannis Pitsikas, another senior Greek commander in the sector, roughly an hour later, after the agreement is already a fait accompli. Pitsikas resigns his command rather than be associated with a decision made without him. Word reaches Rome even faster, and the reaction is immediate. Mussolini is enraged. For 7 months, his army has bled in the Albanian mountains. Unable to force the surrender, Tsolakoglou has now handed to Germany within days of German troops even entering the fight. Historian John Keegan would later document that Tsolakoglou was determined specifically to deny Italy the satisfaction of a victory it had not actually earned on the battlefield. Mussolini's fury reaches Hitler directly. The Führer, keenly aware of the diplomatic cost of humiliating his Axis partner, orders the agreement rescinded, forcibly renegotiated to include Italy over Tsolakoglou's original terms and over Dietrich's own judgment. Hitler dispatches General Alfred Jodl to the front to manage the diplomatic fallout. Field Marshal Wilhelm List, the senior German commander in the theater, is drawn into the crisis as Dietrich travels personally to List's headquarters the following night to account for what he had agreed to. Hitler's own assessment becomes part of the historical record. "You are a good, brave soldier, but no diplomat, and still less a politician. You forgot that we still have a friend called Mussolini." For 2 more days, the surrender hangs in diplomatic limbo. Finally, on April 22nd, the Greek forces are compelled to sign a second revised surrender, one that formally includes Italy this time. But the second signature does not undo what the first one meant. For 2 days, the official record of the war showed a defeated Greek army that chose, deliberately and at real professional risk to the officer who arranged it, to hand its surrender to the enemy it respected, rather than the one it had beaten. Right now, somewhere on YouTube, the same 3 World War II stories are being told for the 10,000th time. This wasn't one of them. If you'd rather discover what's been buried than hear what's been polished to death, subscribe. There's plenty more where this came from. The diplomatic embarrassment Tsolakoglou's decision caused rippled well beyond the immediate surrender negotiations. Mussolini's fury became one more entry in a growing pattern of Italian military underperformance throughout the Balkan campaign, a pattern that would shape how German high command viewed Italian military capability for the remainder of the war, contributing to a broader Axis dynamic in which Italy increasingly operated as the junior, less trusted partner in joint operations, a dynamic that would only deepen as Italian forces struggled again in North Africa in the months that followed. For Hitler, The incident was a minor but real diplomatic headache at a moment when he could least afford friction with Mussolini. Operation Barbarossa was still weeks from launch, and maintaining Axis cohesion mattered more than the specific terms of a single Balkan surrender. The men on the German side of this story went on to very different fates, and the record of those fates is itself worth setting down. Sepp Dietrich continued to rise through the SS command structure for the remainder of the war, eventually commanding the 6th Panzer Army during the Ardennes offensive in the winter of 1944. After the war, he was convicted by an American military tribunal for his role in the Malmedy massacre, in which SS troops under his broader command executed American prisoners of war and served a prison sentence before his eventual release. Kurt Meyer's own war continued along an even more direct path toward atrocity. Promoted repeatedly and later commanding the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, Meyer was convicted after the war by a Canadian military court for his role in the killing of Canadian prisoners of war in Normandy in 1944, sentenced initially to death, a sentence later commuted to life imprisonment and further reduced before his release in 1954. Neither man's later conduct erases what actually happened in the mountains of Greece in April 1941, but neither does the earlier campaign erase what came after. Greece's own occupation, once it began, bore almost no resemblance to the mutual battlefield respect that had briefly defined the surrender negotiations of April 1941. Within months, the Axis occupation of Greece produced famine conditions in Athens and other major cities during the winter of 1941 into 1942, a humanitarian catastrophe that would ultimately claim more Greek lives than the military campaign that preceded it. Resistance movements formed rapidly, setting the stage for years of guerrilla warfare and German reprisal killings. The brief, almost formal respect exchanged between Tsolakoglou and Dietrich in April 1941 did nothing to soften what followed. General Alexandros Papagos, who had commanded the overall Greek war effort, was arrested by German occupation authorities in 1943 and interned in concentration camps for the remainder of the war, including time at Dachau, before being liberated in 1945. He returned to Greece and later entered politics, eventually serving as prime minister in the 1950s, a path that stood in direct contrast to Tsolakoglou's post-war fate as a convicted collaborator. For Tsolakoglou himself, the surrender marked the beginning of a far more complicated legacy. In the weeks that followed, he was installed as head of the first Greek collaborationist government under German and Italian occupation. After the war, he was arrested by Greek authorities, tried for collaboration and treason, and sentenced to death, a sentence later commuted to life imprisonment. He died in prison in 1948. Greek historians have debated for decades exactly how much weight to give Tsolakoglou's decision at Vontonossi, precisely because the man himself became so thoroughly discredited by what followed. Some accounts treat the surrender to Germany alone as a calculated act of national defiance. Others argue his motives were more pragmatic than patriotic. What the documentary record does establish clearly, regardless of which interpretation a given historian favors, is the sequence of events itself. The unauthorized contact, the deliberate exclusion of Italy, Mussolini's fury, and Hitler's direct intervention to reverse it. The motives remain debated. The choice itself and its consequences are not. The war in the Albanian mountains between Greece and Italy has never received the same international attention as the German invasion that ultimately decided Greece's fate. It is often reduced, in broader accounts of the Balkan campaign to a footnote before the real war arrived with the Wehrmacht and the SS in April 1941. Pindus, Ilia Kalamas, and Klisura rarely appear in documentaries built around the German invasion that followed, even though the men who fought at all three places changed how two separate armies thought about what they were walking into. October 28th is still marked in Greece today as Oki Day, a national holiday commemorating Metaxas's refusal and the war that followed, celebrated with parades in cities and villages across the country and among the Greek diaspora worldwide. The 7 months of fighting against Italy remain, for many Greeks, a source of pride, distinct from the German invasion that ultimately ended the campaign. Remembered not as a defeat that erased that earlier victory, but as a separate, much larger force, intervening in a fight Greece had already settled on its own terms. What Tsolakoglou's decision changed was smaller than the war itself, and in its way, more permanent. For 2 days in April 1941, the official record showed a defeated Greek army refusing, even in the act of surrender, to hand Italy something it hadn't earned on the ground, and an SS commander willing to grant it, because his own men had already learned exactly what they were dealing with in the mountains north of Athens. The names in this video were real. The moments were real. If that reality moved you, the like button is how you honor it. Real names, real moments, real consequences. That's the standard this channel holds itself to. Subscribe if that standard is what you're looking for. Where are you watching from? If you share a name, a hometown, or a heritage with anyone in this story, tell us in the comments. These connections matter. Thank you for speaking these names by watching this video. The most powerful thing we can do for the people history nearly forgot is say who they were and what they actually did. You did that today.